Welcome to the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast, where we remember a time when stacks of cards were held together with rubber bands and Mickey Mantles were put in bike spokes. We hope you will enjoy and reminisce as you come along with us as we tell stories about the baseball cards from the Golden Age of Baseball. We will examine the state of the vintage baseball card market and talk to some of the greatest collectors in the hobby. You won't be hearing us talk about any chrome or shiny cards here. Now, to take you on this retrospective journey, here's your host, direct from the shallow end of the gene pool, my son, Mike Moynihan.
Yo and hello everybody, Mike here. Welcome to another episode of the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast, where we talk vintage baseball cards most of the time, but today, or at least right now, I got to talk about something football. And we're recording this episode on Sunday. If you're watching it on air day, it'll be Wednesday. But CFP was announced today for college football, and my TCU Horned Frogs, I'm a proud alumni of TCU, and they made the college football playoff for the first time in their history. It's great to see. In fact, they're the first Big 12 team to make it other than Oklahoma ever in the CFP history. And so I'm just on cloud nine. We might get throttled by Michigan, but at least we're in. Yesterday's Big 12 championship was a heartbreak not to win that and really just make it a no-brainer and go undefeated in the regular season. But, it was good to see that they made it and that they were still considered one of the four best teams in the country. I certainly was biased in thinking that, but it's this great time of year, right? Where it's, almost Christmas. We're in early December. You've got football really just cranking NFL wise. You've got the college football regular season wrapping up. You're going to have bowl season is about to be here. Before we know it, basketball will be off and running. And so both college and pro, pro's going now, but college basketball is, again, early seasons, but we're just going. There's just lots going on sports wise. And it's so much fun as a sports fan. And, I hope that most of you aren't just card people, you're sports people too. And that's so important. But today I'm going to have a conversation with a person that's been a friend of mine for, I guess, a couple of years now, maybe a year and a half, 2 years. He'll be able to more clarify. But Chris, he is from Missouri. In fact, his YouTube channel is called Chris from Missouri, which is good because I always confuse him with, Chris from Green Bay. So that's good that he identifies himself as Chris from Missouri. But we've been friends for a little while. His focus is right up my alley. He's a vintage guy, loves vintage cards, has started his own YouTube channel, and I'm so proud of him for doing that. We've been friends way longer than he's had a YouTube channel, but hopefully with my prodding and encouragement, he finally started creating content, putting himself out there and letting other people see what an amazing guy he is and just what an amazing eye for vintage he has. So I'll stop, heaping praises onto him, telling all these lies, and bring him on. Chris, how you doing, man?
Doing great. And thanks a lot. Thanks for having me on here. I'm pretty excited. I'm like a 14-year-old kid close to Christmas. So thank you very much.
Well, it is close to Christmas. Merry Christmas to you and your family.
As well as to you too.
And
especially Julie.
Right. She's the one that really needs Christmas wishes. No, man, how did you start watching or consuming content, whether it's podcast or YouTube or what got you into that? And how long ago was that?
Oh gosh, it's pre-COVID. And I'm setting it in my desk or my space close to my wife, and I'm messing around with baseball cards and trying to find something that I could use to track my cards. And she said, you can watch a video about baseball cards. There's hundreds of them out there. And I said, you got to be kidding me. And so I searched vintage baseball cards is what I searched. And the first name that came up was Ray from Philly. And then, so I watched Ray from Philly, and I'm not very sharp when it comes to technology. So I watched a couple of his, and he had you on or was talking about you. So then I typed that in, and so it was like a light bulb came to me, and then I just kept watching it, and I didn't comment very much on anybody's stuff. Part of it was because I didn't want to screw anything up. I didn't really know how, and I didn't want to ask another question of my wife how I do this. But I watched a lot of stuff, and you called me a lurker one time, and it just, I really saw how much fun you guys were having, and I could hear it and see it in your videos, and I could really, you're on a few different channels, and then you have somebody on, then I click on them. So it's been, I've had the most fun in this hobby, collecting baseball cards this last 6 weeks, 7 weeks than I've had any time in my life, and I mean that.
Since you started creating content and
That is
started
correct.
really interacting with other people, I tell how much I think the people really enhance your hobby when you start making connections and talking with other like-minded people. Would you say that's true?
That 100% true. And when you just watching your guys' video about getting prepared for the national, and that was in Chicago. I said, I have to go. And then you and I had messaged back. I'd messaged you and stuff. But I just had to go to Chicago. And when I went to your meet and greet, I found dozens and dozens of people just like me. I mean, some were younger, some were older, but they all had a love of collecting cards. And I live in Middle Missouri, and I have a couple people in town that I can share my collection with and talk to them about, but not really. I mean, they were impressed, or they ask questions and stuff, but by just creating content, it feels like I've become friends with a lot of me's, and now I'm getting close enough to with some that they can make fun of me, and I make fun of them, and it's great. It's great.
Yeah, that is, again, a great part of this community, certainly. And whether it's on podcasts, or it's funny how quick we all go down the rabbit hole. I mean, my experience wasn't dissimilar from yours. The first guy I found was Ray from Philly. Now that was 9 years ago or 8 years ago, but it's the same deal. And Ray and I became friends. He was the first guy I ever talked to outside of, just people that I know, like this random dude in Philadelphia who happens to like baseball cards. So it's not dissimilar. And that's just a very common thing I hear from other guys, that you just make connections and you just start somewhere, right? You got to put yourself out there. You got to take some, risk in terms of just being vulnerable. Sounds so cheesy, but just putting yourself out there and not being afraid of, looking bad, or nobody's going to downplay your cards or anything. Like, people are always worried about things that I think they don't need to worry about, but who am I to tell them what to do? But we're going to talk vintage today, Chris. I mean, you and I are so cut from the same cloth, and we think very different. We think very similar. We collect a lot of the same sets. We collect a lot of the same stuff, and that's great. What's cool is there's plenty to go around. Like, some people worry, I don't want to tell people what I collect because then they'll go after the same stuff I do. I'm like, come on, man. Like, nothing we're going after is really rare. None of it's, impossible to find. It's just, I think the benefits outweigh the cons. If you're going to get outbid by somebody, there will be another one next week or in the next couple of days. So don't sweat that. But speaking of us sharing in the same stuff, one thing that we both gravitate towards is kind of those low grade vintage cards, right? What to you, Chris, makes low grade acceptable. It's easy to have people just, oh, that's not a very good grade. And in the vintage world and the modern world, you've talked about it on video, it's so different. You've got, if it's a modern card and it's not a 10, you might as well not even own it. And that is just not true in the vintage world. And not everybody thinks that way about modern, but that's just kind of the general held perception, which I don't really agree with. A card's a card, but in vintage, the spectrum of grades is on the table in terms of ownership. I think it lends itself to that. So what do you think makes collecting low grade so beneficial?
Okay. So I've heard you say quantity or quality and quantity, mixed to get a bunch of cards that, that meet some needs in your collection. And I started out as a vintage collector. I mean, I didn't open packs. When I was growing up, we didn't have any income that we could spend on cards for me. And I received cards from guys older than me that didn't want them, that just didn't think they were really good. And I loved them then. And so now, I'm going after some set runs or player runs. And if I look at a card and it's centered or pretty centered, that's okay. I mean, that's okay with me. I don't like crease cards unless they're the cards that I created the creases on. That I know where I got it. I know the story about it. And then I look past that misfit card, but I needed a Jackie Robinson Leaf card. If I have a certain amount of money to take to the National and I try to go after that limits how many cards I got or can get. But if I can get a lower grade that suits, I'm going to pick that up. And, I was trying to explain to a friend of mine that about collecting vintage. And I now picture it. If there's two cards, let's say there's two cards, one's let's say a Mickey Mantle rookie, and one's a 1 and one's a 5. Well, a 5 is, thousands of dollars. And the
tens of thousands
of dollars. So just imagine them sitting next together, the 1 and the 10, and the 1 is centered, or it looks okay. And the 5 is there, but the 1, you get to stack up hundreds of dollars of bills of the value of the 5. And you get to choose between the two. I get the 1 and $9,000, or I can have the 5. I can take that extra money that I didn't spend and I can go buy something else that fits my collection. And I really have stuck to that. And, in one of my videos, I said, I'm not ashamed of them at all, but I get that some people want, I heard it from you first, where I'm trying to get a vintage, a 60s card in a greatest 6, or a 70s card in a greatest 7. And I get that. But if I already have one in my collection of one of those players and it comes back a 4, that's going to stay there for a while until I run into a card better than that with extra money that I might have. And, but I don't think anybody should have to, explain or be embarrassed of their cards.
Yeah, it's always a balancing act, right? Trying to figure out the cost benefit of which cards to buy. I'd buy all high grade cards if I could afford them, right? If they were all $1, great. I'll take the 8, please, or the 9 or whatever. It's just not feasible. And so you end up, for me, especially during the boom, right? I didn't want to stop buying cards. I had to lower my expectations of the grades that I used to be able to get for certain amounts of money. Okay, maybe I can't buy those 4s, 5s and 6s in the 50s and 60s. Maybe I do 3s to 5s in the 50s to 60s, and just buy great examples of those. We always say buy the card, not the grade. That's something you hear most content creators preach. There are some guys that just save up and buy the really high grade one because that's the one that will retain its value the most.
And that's okay. I mean, that's okay if that's how they do it. That's just not how I do it.
Yeah.
I
Most
want to.
people can't do it that way. They just can't afford to, you know what I mean? And
I do.
the reality is I want a lot of great cards. And
Yeah.
I have to go, look, we all only have so much money. Some people's budgets are bigger than others, but at some point you go, yep, I can't do that. I can't buy that card because it's just too much on one card.
Well, I want to be a card collector and not a slab collector. So when somebody looks at my cards, I want the number that's on the outside of the slab to be the last thing that they look at. I want to find a good card, and let them look at it and then say, oh, this is a 2, something like that. But I just do not want to see myself collecting the slabs. I want to collect the card that's in a slab.
The best compliment someone can pay me when I'm at a show and I'm with my friend at the National somewhere and I buy a card, a 2, a 3, a 4, kind of that lower grade on vintage, and I hand it to them and they go, man, that's a great looking X. That's a great looking 3, or that's a great looking 2. That's the compliment I want, because I don't have to pay higher numerical grading prices for a lower grade car. I can buy a 2 is a 2, and yeah, you can pay a premium for better examples of certain numerical grades, no doubt. But the reality is you're not going to pay higher, a 5 price for a 3. You're just not. You may pay a little more than a normal 3, but you're just going to pay less. And that, like you said, stretches your hobby budget even more. When was the first national that you went to? Was it 18?
It was in Chicago
Or 19?
2 years ago.
No, wait, that was 21.
So I've been 2 years in a row.
21 and 22 then. And we met at the 21 national in person.
Yes.
We had talked before that. And I remember meeting you at that meet and greet, and you just walk up and we sat down and we just started talking cards. And you started showing me stuff. And it was just, it was like, I just got to talk with a friend and look at cards and shoot the bull. And again, you've been very generous to me, adding some things to my collection that I love, that I really appreciate over the last couple of years. You've been incredibly nice to me.
Well, that's kind of what this community is all about too. When I talk to a fellow YouTuber, like on the side, and I'll ask what cards they need. And, if it's something I have, maybe I can work out a trade with them or something if I have extra, or it's just nice to know, because if I run across something that's not that expensive, the best thing is, I came into contact with a great collection here. I just walked into it on accident and purchased it. And there was a lot of cards in there that I already had. And, listen, we're just temporarily holding these cards for somebody else. And, but again, that's what the hobby's all about. Finding stuff. So, it all works out in the end.
It really does. I want to leave people with this whole low grade vintage idea as being something that, especially for people that are new to vintage, you can test the waters with low grade vintage and not probably get yourself in too much financial, if you decide you don't like it, or you can always upgrade, I guess is my point. Like, you can always, oh man, I can use this too, and a little bit more money to get XY, a better grade, or you can always leverage that into better cards. You mentioned you're not a slab collector. I think that's interesting. You're a card collector. But you're a PSA guy, or you like buying graded cards. Why is that?
Well, so this is the truth. My wife and I were doing some estate planning, and a few years back, and I knew I had some value in the cards, but as well as I do, she doesn't care about, she she doesn't care about me collecting cards, but I don't want to stick her with all these cards to sell, especially raw. And so my local card shop guy talked me into getting some cards graded and getting them encased. And, I didn't trust it. I mean, everybody's been sending millions of cards off, but I didn't trust it. So I sent off, about 20 1950 Bowman cards of just, commons. And they came back to me and then I stopped worrying about it. So I just started sending out bulk of stuff that I had. And, I like them. I like them graded. I do. And I do collect PSA more than SGC or BVG. And it's just because it fits together in my hobby in the way I collect. But I have some SGCs and some BVGs, and I even have the
GAI.
Satchel Paige GAI. That's right, okay. Satchel Paige rookie. That sometime I'm going to cross over. I just haven't had the guts yet to cross it over, but I like the uniformity in the PSA. But I've gone on a mission to kind of grade any of my vintage that makes sense, that I've already had, for years, just to slab up cards. And I know I don't have as much vintage graded cards as you do, but I am so glad, I'm so glad that the estate planning guy said that's a great idea, and my local card shop talked me into it, because I don't think I'm going to look back, even if something new comes. Okay, I'm good where I am.
Yeah. There, we bitch and moan about problems with grading, and there are those. Like, there's no question it's not a perfect system, whether we don't believe the grade we were assigned was accurate, or yes, PSA loses cards, and yes, PSA screws stuff up and damages stuff. Like, look, there's no perfect system out there, but in terms of ease of the next generation to make a decision about what they want to do with your cards, I know from, chasing cardboard, when we go look at collections and they're raw, it's hard because they're all, how do you really, I might think it's a certain grade and somebody else might look at it and think it's another grade. But when you have a graded card, it's just the ease of understanding the value. It narrows the range of potential values down significantly when it's graded, right?
Sure does.
And that range is pretty big when it's raw and much smaller when it's graded. So you mentioned PSA being your grading company of choice, third-party grader of choice. Let me ask you this. What don't you like about the grading process? Or just since you've submitted a bunch of cards, I mean, it's okay to have things you just go, I wish it was like this. I wish it was better this way.
Well, okay. So I hate to bash on like PSA, that kind of stuff, but
let's just call it a recommendation.
Okay. Well, so I would recommend PSA to anybody that's wanting to get their slabs or wanting to get card slab. Now, I get it where people with T206s and those older cards like how they look in an SGC, and I do. And you and I have a buddy, Don Field of Dreams. He uses SGC primarily, and they look. When he opens them up and shares them on YouTube, they look real pretty. But since I have a couple thousand cards graded by PSA only, then I don't know. It doesn't keep me from stopping to buy a card I don't have.
If it's not graded PSA, you're saying?
Correct.
Right.
I wish, and I've heard you talk about it. I collect the PSA set registry, but I don't subscribe to it right now, but I'll get on. I'll collect, like I'm collecting the Hall of Fame, post-war Hall of Fame run, and I have some SGCs in there and some BBGs, and and I would go after the one I don't have before I upgraded the others.
Gotcha.
And so, I mean, what was your first card that you got graded?
Oh man,
Do you remember?
no, it was. But I did hate grading at the beginning. I thought it was so stupid. I didn't know why I needed to get a card in case. That made no sense. But it just started making sense when I started buying more expensive cards. I'm like, I better make sure. And I've talked about this a bunch on videos. It was more the authenticity of it and the protection of the card going forward that I cared about more than anything in terms of the grading. And obviously that was a good move. Not, I don't
Sure,
know what the
sure.
future held with grading, but and autograph authentication, that was a huge thing for me for Hall of Famer autographs that I wasn't sure, hey, they may be wrong too, but at least two of us are wrong then, instead of only me being wrong about an autograph not being authentic. And so again, it's not perfect either on the autograph authentication side. So, but those were the two main reasons. And I just went, full bore. And I have some SGC. I have a few SGC slabs. I have a GAI slab. Like I get it. A bunch of BVG stuff. Not a bunch. A few BVG stuff. I like the consistency. We've talked about that. I've talked about that ad nauseum. But that's important to me.
Here's another reason for me with PS getting them graded.
Yeah, go ahead.
I buy cards, sometimes from people, and so I set up at two shows about two different towns about 8 times a year, four times in each place. So I sell vintage cards, and I had the Pee Wee Reese in action card. Okay.
Yep. 1953 Bowman color. Yep.
And I did not have it graded. And so I sent them. I'm sorry. I had two. I had two. One of them I knew was trimmed. You could tell it was trimmed because it didn't even match up with the other one. But the other I sent off to be graded, and it came back non-authentic. And I had that thing in my collection for a long time. Okay, I had it for a long time, and I just think I would have been so down on myself knowing I sold a card to somebody else that wasn't authentic. And if somebody would accuse me of that, it would bother me.
But Chris, shouldn't you know what an authentic? I mean, that's the thing that bothers people. Well, you should know. You've been in the hobby forever, man. There's some really good fakes. Like, I wish I could tell you I know everything and all of that. I've made so many mistakes over the decades of doing this. I mean, my point is, hey, you should know, Chris. Really? Would you know? Like, whoever you are, not you, people
I understand
watching,
yeah.
And not you, Chris. But I would hate that criticism. Like you said, I would hate to know you sold somebody a bill of goods, certainly unintentionally, and like, hey, I didn't know, I didn't catch it, whatever it is. Yeah, I don't like feeling. I wouldn't want to feel that way either. I totally get that.
Yeah, and money has a weird thing to do with some people. If they spend quite a bit of money on something, and you just, and it was wrong, came back and it's fake, you just lost a friend or a patron for life, and unless you try to make it right.
What's your favorite project set that you're working on right now? Like what's your favorite one of all time?
So hands down, the one that I'm working on right now is the post-war Hall of Fame rookie card. And so I knew I had rookie cards. I collected rookie cards. And sometimes even, sometimes even before I met some of these YouTube channels, I was wrong on rookie cards, on a couple of them. But so I started the post-war Hall of Fame rookie set, and there's 113 of them now, but I think there was 108 when I started the set, or something like that. And, I had about 90 of them, 85 or 90 of them. And so just chasing some cards. I've traded for most cards, but I've spent some money at some shows. But I'm down to I need one card, and it's the Hal Newhouser Leaf rookie card that Blue Jacket 66 would say it's a 49 Leaf, and I don't have that, and it's a short print, and so that's my favorite. I've completed some. Like I have a poster on the wall behind me here, behind me somewhere, that my wife picked up for me in New York, and has 20 cards, and it's the poster is prints of 20 cards, includes the Dizzy Dean rookie, the Hank Aaron rookie, that kind of stuff. And when I started that, I only really needed 4 cards to finish that set. So that's my second. And believe it or not, the one that I had fun finishing up, because I had a lot of them, but it's a 33 card set. I'm going to show one. What I'm showing you is a Joe DiMaggio in a 61 golden press.
Yeah.
And that is not a hard set to get, but I finished that set with most of my cards. And then I picked up a couple that my Babe Ruth was just worn out. I mean, because I played with my cards as a younger kid, and every time I would use the Yankees as a team, of course, he would, I had him out and put them in rubber bands. But the 61 golden press was really fun for me to finish up.
Yeah, it's a great set. I don't know if you saw in a video, I had a collection that we saw in Chasing Cardboard that I got an entire uncut or unpunched out book of the Golden Press set. And it was in unbelievable shape. I had some spine wrinkles on the book itself, but if you're going to pull those cards out and grade them, like you're going to, if you're careful, as long as you're careful, you're probably going to do all right. And I sold it just as is, as a raw book. I have a feeling that as I continue to do these collections, I can't buy everything, but I know down the road I'll be like, oh, I wish I would have just bought that. And that's
Sure.
one of those things. And I'm like, I probably should have just bought that myself and held on to that, because that's a pretty cool item to have. It's not rare. That's not a hard set, like you said, but it's just a cool set. It's got a lot of great players in it, and it's in the vintage era. Very, very cool. Yeah,
So
that's a great set.
when I was younger, one of the games I'd play with a neighbor is we would take our cards, and he would take the Yankees, or both of us take the Yankees, and we'd play our cards against each other. So we'd put our first baseman, second baseman out in the field of 9 that looked like a baseball, and then see who was the best defender. For instance, if he had a Thurman Munson and I had a Yogi Berra, we would argue who's the best defender and stuff.
Right.
And all the way through. And then after that round, we'd do our second round and do a starting lineup. And so it got to where I couldn't it wasn't fair for me to use the golden press cards, because we changed it to it had to be playing days cards.
Gotcha.
And but I've enjoyed that set. Somebody would say, do you have a Babe Ruth card? When I was a kid, and I'd say, well, sure I do, and be very proud of it.
Absolutely. When you think about collecting these sets and stuff, I mean, you do player runs, you do again, we're very similar. I do all these things too. It's great that we have these like-minded interests. What do you think makes a great vintage set? Like we talked about the Golden Press set, why is that great? Well, it's got all these amazing players and guys that had retired and Hall of Famers and all-time greats. But thinking about just a regular, like, what's your favorite top set of all time?
Okay. Well, I don't want to blow smoke, be too nice to you, but a lot of the stuff that I do, I watch a video and say, oh, I would like to do that. I now am thinking I want to work on Hall of Famers, the 4-decade Hall of Famers, which you talk about great, and see how many that I have and that kind of stuff. But if I had to say what is my favorite set, and it's kind of funny, it's the 76 Topps baseball card set. If I had to be pinned down to say that, and what I like so much about that is some of the action photos. And my favorite card in my whole collection is a 76 Johnny Bench. He's kind of just staring somebody down after they slid past him or something, watching them walk back. And I just love that 76. But I have a friend who's collecting the 60 set, and so I've paid a lot of attention to those, and I thought, well, why don't I do that? And
What year did you mention?
1960 tops.
That's my favorite.
That's and you've said that before, and okay, so I have another friend telling me that, and then I look and say, okay, why don't I do that? But I loved you guys did a show about your favorite sets in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And, it's funny how you can disagree totally, with somebody and you still have a love for the cards. And if somebody liked it and this is my favorite set or my second favorite set, then I would get in my case and I'd get a couple of those cards out and say, oh, okay, I get this. I see why they like that. But no, the 76 and the 60 are my tops, are my favorite sets.
Yeah, I find that the more I am in this hobby, the longer I do this, the more cards I acquire over time, the more cards I used to think I didn't like, designs I didn't like. Like I used to not like the 55 Bowman, and now I love it. I love the TV set. I love the design. I used to think it was just butt ugly. So I don't know if it's aging like a fine wine or if I'm just mellowing out as an older guy or I'm just being more accepting. Who knows? It's probably a combination of all of those things that has made me really appreciate all the cards, all the sets. I'm not a huge fan, for example, of 61 top. There's like the Willie Mays card. I think it's just like, oh, what a waste,
No hat. The
hatless wonder, Willie Mays, and a lot of the cards in 60. I don't like all the photos of 60, but I like the design. It's simple, it's clean. There's some really great cards in 61 tops. So even though I may not go, oh, I really gravitate towards that, I appreciate it more, like you said, after when you watch other people talk about it, or you just learn more. I think you gain an appreciation. You just have a healthy respect for all of them, and you go, yep, I get that. Like 72 was so ugly for me for a long time too. 72 tops, I just thought it was ugly, and now I'm very tolerant of it. In fact, I kind of dig it. And
that's funny. The 72 is, I almost would have said 72 over the 60 because I just love those colors. And I was 5 years old when those came out. But so I didn't have them, but some of my buddies, I remember getting a 72 Burt Blyleven and trading an older card for that card. And not really an older card. Here's just, I'd get a Baseball Digest magazine or a baseball magazine that my dad might have had or found, and I'd cut out a photo of it and I'd put it on cardboard and tape around it. And I know I had a friend that felt sorry for me. He was about 10 years older than me, and so I got the Burt Blyleven for the first time, the 72. It's not his rookie, but I thought it was his rookie, because that's what, it's what I was told. And I had that card. I still have that card somewhere. And I love the 72, but I knew, listening to you guys, you weren't the only one that didn't like the 72.
Right.
And it just kind of depends,
It's weird. You just brought up an amazing memory for me. I don't know how many one thing I never hear people talk about, and I don't know how many of you feel this way. I never hear people talking about Baseball Digest. And when I remember getting my first subscription to Baseball Digest, 1983. The first one I ever got had Rick Dempsey on the cover. He had just won the World Series MVP, and I think it was 83. And I remember getting that, and every month for the next, I don't know, decade, probably, certainly 7 years to 10 years, I had a monthly subscription to Baseball Digest, and I would so eagerly look forward to getting that. And then I started probably 85-ish, 86. I started my Beckett subscription, which continued, and so every month I would get a baseball digest and I'd get my Beckett baseball card monthly, and I would just cover to cover, read it, and then go into the store and buy any other baseball magazines that I could find. And I just ate that stuff up. I just loved it. And everything's so digital now. It's kind of sad, really, because it's hard to get excited about, I don't know, an article on the web.
Well,
Like
I was so lucky growing up where I did. Our local newspaper, the guy that was in charge of the sports, he's a sport editor, and he's still alive today. And anyway, he loved baseball and he collected baseball cards, and he would put the box scores. There was a whole page or half a page of all the games' box scores, and kids don't get to see most of that now. They might get to see their local teams, but I got to see everybody's box scores. And then also before the All-Star break, and then all the way till the end of the year, he would have league leaders, like the league leaders in the American League and home runs all the way through, RBIs. And every week he update that every week. And it's still, American League and National League leaders and everything. And as a kid, I got to look at that. And I think it helped me even know more about baseball. I mean, that's what Baseball Digest, you had to reading those articles and stuff, you had to, learn by digesting some of that. And I remember my first Sports Digest or Baseball Digest book, I bought at the bookmobile. The library had a bookmobile, and I got one of those, and one of my neighbors had a bunch of them. There you go.
My first one. It was technically January 1984. So, because it would always be, basically a month behind. Uh-huh. And I'm showing a picture of the 83 or the first Baseball Digest I ever owned, which was, I love how it's got that's how mine would come, with that mail label on it, and yes. I'd always be pissed when it was over and I couldn't get it off without tearing the cover.
Okay.
I was like, dang it.
Trying to rip off the label. Is that
exactly.
What you're doing?
Trying to rip off the mailing label did not work very well. And so, but that was my first, God, it was such a great time when I just.
Have you seen the video of Rick Dempsey during a rain delay?
When he's acting all goofy, or?
Oh, he's acting goofy. I forget what player he's trying to emulate, but he stuffs his shirt with a bunch of clothing to make him look heavy, and then he slides around the bases, and if you ever Google it sometime, but he was very good defensive catcher.
Yeah,
great defensive catcher.
He was.
That's another thing I think we have in common, isn't it? You were a catcher and I was a catcher.
We were both catchers. Yeah, I think we found a bunch of during our first few conversations, we identified several common threads between our upbringings and our just all kinds of stuff, which is what's great about this hobby. And I appreciate you bringing up the Baseball Digest thing, because that was a huge part of my baseball education growing up.
Yeah.
And learning. And so speaking of greats, we have, we're recording this on Sunday. By the time it airs, we'll know if anybody else got into the Hall of Fame via the ERA committee. Do you think anybody makes it?
Well, if Dale Murphy is going to make the Hall of Fame, it better be this time. And I've always wanted him in, but the reason I say that is there's 2 Atlanta Braves players that's on the committee, and to elect him. Now I know they just have to get so many votes. And I don't know. What's odd though, is there's 2 Braves players on there. There's 2 Detroit Tigers players, and there are 2 Chicago Cubs players.
Yep.
And then, it depends how hard they're arguing for you in the room. But it's going to be tough for more than one to make it. And I wish I was sitting in the room to see who was voicing their opinion for who. But if I was going to pick one to make it, it would be Kirk Schilling. I think Palmero's going to have a hard time making it. I mean, even though he's, the stats are crazy, but I saw an article that Ryan Sandberg's um, induction speech into the Hall of Fame, in point kind of chastised it was in 2005, and he kind of chastised the steroid players, and
he's on the committee.
And he's on the committee. So, he's in. So maybe he's changed his mind. But you and I talked about this, and I know your views about it. And I used to be totally against you. And my argument, and I loved it because I texted you one time late when you were doing that show, and I said, I'm a teacher at heart. I was a high school administrator and stuff. And everybody, the argument was, a bunch of them say, well, he was a Hall of Famer before he got in. And I remember, talking to parents come in after their kids got caught cheating on the last page of the test. And they said, well, he didn't cheat until he got the last page. Well, it doesn't matter. We're going to rip up this test anyway. So I used to do that until, I can be jerked both directions. I don't get influenced by too many people, but my daughter is on part-time curator of a small museum in our town. And I remember, I think I told you about this. She said, Barry Bonds, isn't he the all-time home run hitter? And she said, I said, yes. And she said, well, the Baseball Hall of Fame is a museum, and you can't really tell the story about the Hall of Fame unless you put the all-time home run leader in the Hall of Fame. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And you can do that about Clemens, but I think they wait around a little longer. And I think the only one I think that's going to get in is Schilling. I would like to see a lot of them get in. I mean, how about you?
I think McGriff makes it for sure.
Okay.
And then I think Schilling, if two get in, and I agree with you, it's hard to get two in because each committee member is only allowed 3 votes. They can't vote for everybody, So, and you have to have 12 out of the 16 to get in. So, to me, it's McGriff, and then if 2 get in, I think it'll be Schilling. Murphy, Mattingly. I heard somebody made an argument, and I went and verified it, and it's true. Mattingly and Kirby Puckett had very similar careers, and everybody's like no brainer on Kirby Puckett, like absolutely, and most people are pretty lukewarm on Mattingly, and I'm like, that made me rethink Mattingly. Not that I think Mattingly should be in the Hall of Fame, and I do think Puckett should be in. So it's this, both of them had their careers kind of stifled by injuries. Puckett had the eye thing, and it was very sudden. Mattingly had a slower decline because of his back. And so, but if you look at their career stats side by side, it's shockingly similar.
Right.
And I'm like, wow, okay. So that made me at least, like, if Mattingly got in, I'm not going to be mad. If Murphy gets in, I'm not going to be mad. I'm not going to be like, oh, this is a travesty and throw out the Hall of Fame. I hate when people, I don't even care about the Hall of Fame anymore because such and such person's in. Like, really? Come on. Yeah. I don't like that Harold Baines is in the Hall of Fame, but I didn't vote for him. And it doesn't diminish the whole to have, there's probably a dozen guys at least that you could name and go, yeah, probably if they had to do that over again, it probably wouldn't go that way. Right. But you shouldn't take away from the greats just because there's a few probably undeserving players in there.
Right. I've been writing a book for 100 years that I'll never finish because by the time I finish saying who should be in the Hall of Fame, they either get in the Hall of Fame but the players, when these kind of committees chose people back in the day, I don't think, Dave Bancroft probably should be in, Rick Farrell shouldn't be in. But, I look at Steve Garvey, and when I was growing up for 10 years there, I believe he's probably the best first baseman in the National League.
Right.
And arguably there could be others, but for 10 years, he's the best. And I always thought if you're going to be the best at something, then you ought to be in the Hall of Fame, 10-time All-Star, 200 hits a bunch of times. But then I look at Bill Freehan, who was the best catcher in the American League for a long time.
Right.
But his stats probably don't warrant it. So for every argument you have, that for your argument, you have an argument against it too, or that makes sense to me. And boy, I hope McGriff gets in it. That'd be great.
Yeah, I saw all of McGriff's career. He was just the model of consistency to me. I mean, just mark down 25 to 30 home runs, 110 RBIs, and that just felt like McGriff, and that matters. Consistent greatness, right? That to me is the mark of a Hall of Famer.
Yeah. His stats mirror like Willie Stargell.
Yeah.
I don't know what they were in WAR, but I'm sure with like Billy Williams, he's close to Billy Williams, and stuff. But
I think that I do like the Eric. Like, to me, the best judge of who should be in the Hall of Fame are other Hall of Famers. Like, if you were to say only one segment of the population can vote, that's who I would pick to vote for the Hall of Fame. If they don't know, nobody knows. If you get this group of former players, i.e. Hall of Famers, managers, executives, people that are in the game, who else to better judge? It shouldn't be me on my couch, or a baseball writer who has God knows what kind of agenda. Right. So to me, I actually, if they elect him, I'm going to be like, yep, which is funny because then I just said Harold Baines and he was elected by an era committee, right? A veterans committee.
But look at, Minnie Minoso was elected too. And, I kind of changed my mind on him because Bill James kind of, I read his stuff and he thought he was in, but he probably wouldn't have got in if the era committee wasn't comprised of a couple people that are part of that organization.
Right.
But if you want to see some mistakes, that the baseball writers do. Heck, I think I'm right on this. I'm sure if John Mangini watches it, he'll correct me. But Ted Williams didn't get the MVP when he won the Triple Crown. And if you'd put his stats next to Joe DiMaggio, it looked like Joe DiMaggio missed 20 games or 30 games. It just suffers in comparison. So if you make one guy mad, I mean, look at all the Hall of Famers that weren't first ballot Hall of Famers. Yogi Berra, not a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's the best catcher in baseball for a long time. 3-time MVP. And
I think the voting. I think more guys today are willing to. It used to be kind of the old boys club of writers that you wouldn't elect a guy on this first ballot. Like, hey, let him stick around a little while. We got other guys to vote in. It was just this. I don't know if it's biased towards allowing, you got to be upper echelon to get first ballot. Now, I think they vote for the guys they think are deserving. By and large, I think the writers have gotten it right over the years. Like,
to
me, I think they've made less egregious inclusions into the Hall of Fame than the veterans committees.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But the veterans committee still, I think, is a valuable part of recognizing baseball history and getting some guys in that certainly deserve to be. Buck O'Neill's a great example. The pioneer kind of guys, the influencers. I don't know what you call Buck O'Neill. Ambassador is probably the best name you could give to Buck O'Neill. To me, he was the most deserving of that entire class. Like, absolutely. But enough about the Hall of Fame. As we close up here, Chris, tell everybody how they can watch you on YouTube and start following you.
Okay, well, my channel is Chris from Missouri, and the only reason that name is that way is because two different influencers that I had me mention my name on their channel was, it's Chris from Missouri. So I don't have a cool name, but just get on Chris from Missouri. I have about a dozen videos now, and it's again, I hope if you like vintage, I hope what I do on my channel you enjoy. If it's not for you, I understand that as well. But Chris from Missouri, click like on it if you like it. If you don't like it, don't subscribe.
Well, I will put a link to your channel, Chris, in the description below of this video. So like I said, I always tell people like, hey, here's somebody I follow. Here's somebody I like. Go watch them. And it's okay if you don't. Like, you don't have to like everything I like just because I say it. But go check them out. At least give them a shot and see if it's something that's up your alley. So, Chris, thanks for being a great friend. Thanks for what you're now contributing to the YouTube community. And thanks for being on the show.
Well, thanks for allowing me, and thank you for everything you do for the hobby. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. All right, guys, we'll catch you next week for another episode. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. Have a good one. Keep collecting.